All right, we have more changes unfolding in the Golden State. Changes that have small and mid-sized companies being forced out of business, closing shop after new laws recently went into effect. Laws, plural, by the way, not just one. Because what we're seeing in California is best described by the phrase death by 1,000 cuts. That's what's happening here, with the state slowly plunging their sticky hands into the pot every way they can, changing laws, creating laws, new rules, regulations, leading to this slow grind down, grinding away of the free market. And it's just gotten even worse after the state passed a new law last September to increase the minimum wage to $20 an hour. You probably read about that recently. And that law just went into effect this week. The result, price hikes around the state and mass layoffs. Wait till you see this. But before we get started, thank you for liking and sharing these videos. It really helps out the channel. And consider subscribing so you don't miss these regular updates. So California, a beautiful state, stunningly beautiful state. If you've never driven up the 101 in NorCal, you should. It's worth it. Great weather, probably the best weather in the country. I've been traveling recently, these past 6 weeks, up and down the Pacific Northwest, and I've spent a lot of time in California, specifically Northern California, from San Francisco to Humboldt County, a lot of time in Humboldt to Del Norte County. And one thing you'll notice quickly is how expensive everything is. Higher, significantly higher than back east. Gas prices, no surprise. Everyone knows gas in California, especially along the coast, is the highest in the country. We're talking well over $5 a gallon, but food prices too, home prices, rent prices, everything is higher out west. And unfortunately, it just got even worse thanks to a law that was passed last September, but only went into effect this week, called AB 1228. You probably read about this recently in the news. The minimum wage law increases the minimum wage to $20 an hour for restaurant workers, which sounds good on the surface. Let's be honest. Everyone wants people to earn more money, right? So what's the problem? Well, when you look into the details of this law, there's a number of red flags. First and foremost, whenever you start seeing carve-outs in legislation for very niche business categories, it's a tip-off, folks. Someone somewhere is getting a favor, and the carve-outs in this bill are insane, all over the place. But the most flagrant and obvious one is the one that Gavin Newsom, the governor himself, demanded, personally required, in order to sign this bill into law. A carve-out for guess who? His longtime best friend, billionaire Greg Flynn, owner of Panera Bread. Look, this is making even some of his stenographers in the media do a double take. Check this out. Bloomberg did a deep dive into this. Here's what they found. Quote, billionaire Greg Flynn, who made his fortune running one of the world's largest restaurant franchise operations, is getting a new boost from sourdough loaves and brioche buns. That's because a California law that's about to raise the state minimum wage at fast food spots to $20 an hour offers, quote, an unusual exemption for chains that bake bread and sell it as a standalone item. Governor Gavin Newsom pushed for that break personally, according to people familiar with the matter. Among the main beneficiaries is Flynn, a longtime Newsom donor whose California holdings include his Panera Bread locations, unquote. So why would he do this? Why would Gavin Newsom do this? Gavin, what were you thinking? Bloomberg writes this. Flynn, who has been involved in business dealings with Newsom, in addition to contributing to the governor's political campaigns, had behind closed doors urged the governor's top aides to reconsider whether fast casual chains such as Panera should be classified as fast food. It's according to people familiar with the discussions and asked not to be named because the talks were private, unquote. This is the definition, folks, of crony capitalism, the merger of state and corporate power. When corporations use their connections in government, their friends in power, like Greg Flynn apparently did with the governor of California. Look, this is one example, just one single example. And this happens in almost every single bill that gets passed. The system in this country is used and abused by the super rich, by the lobby regime. Realize this is not free market capitalism. This is the opposite. If you're a capitalist, as I am, this is not what you want to see. This hurts capitalism. Again, this is just one example of how our system is used to strip the middle class in this country, the small business owner, the small restaurateur, suck all their equity, all their assets, and transfer it to the upper echelon. Because who's paying for this? The small businesses, not the billionaire mega corporation like Panera. No, they get a break. But the small, hardworking business owner who owns a few dozen locations is paying for it. This has nothing to do with the minimum wage itself, by the way. You can make arguments for and against raising the minimum wage, which in this case I'm against, and I'll tell you why. The bill itself is a joke. The only good thing they did was limit the raise to restaurants with 60 plus locations. But the downstream effects of this in a state like California, a state that's already dealing with one of the highest cost of living crises in the country, is the worst place to try this. You see, people assume that California can absorb something like this because the state's rich, huge economy. It's all true. But here's the ugly truth about it. California has a class system. You got the uber rich up top, the billionaires up top. Then you have the very rich people, which includes the political class. Then you got the poor folk. And we're talking poor in California terms. The middle class has been hollowed out here. One way to see this is the divide between the people at the top and those at the bottom. The gap between the two is just massive. When you compare it to other states, there's no comparison. A huge number of super rich people and a huge number of poor people. Now, this law was an attempt, I'm assuming, to help the people at the bottom, but they targeted the restaurant industry. So what you're left with is a billion-dollar corporation like Panera getting a carve-out and able to continue at their original minimum wage, while other smaller companies, private companies, small businesses, small restaurants with only a few dozen locations are now stuck paying $20 per hour for a dishwashing job or an entry-level hostess job. So what's the result? Well, we're already seeing the result. Watch this.
Many restaurants already responding to the wage hike, raising the prices on everything from coffee to burritos to burgers.
NBC4's Conan Nolan joins us now from the newsroom with more on what this means. Conan.
That's right. Never before has an industry faced a surge in labor costs like this one. Normally, minimum wage hikes are phased in over time. This was a 25% pay hike all at once.
The higher wages could have a trickle-down effect on customers. Fast food chains, including McDonald's and Chipotle, say they plan to raise menu prices to make up for the higher wages. Some businesses say they will need to cut staff. State labor filings say some Pizza Hut locations are already laying off workers. Hundreds of delivery drivers are many of those impacted.
Businesses are closing. Small restaurant chains are closing. Look at this. Foster's Freeze and L'Amour's employees were left abashed when the restaurant suddenly announced its closing after the announcement of the minimum wage increase for fast food workers. The unexpected closure caught the employees off guard on a typical workday. The workers disclosed how they arrived for their shifts expecting a normal workday, but were shocked by the restaurant's closure. The former assistant general manager, Monica Navarro, initially thought it was an April Fool's joke. And if they aren't closing, guess what's going to happen? You're going to pay the difference. You and me, everyone who shops and eats at these establishments will pay the difference because that's what happens. Put yourself in the restaurant's position. If you were a restaurateur, you owned a restaurant, what would you do? Would you eat the cost? Restaurants work on these tiny margins. Why do you think waiters rely on their tips? Because the cost of labor is a huge chunk of the operating expense. So what would you do? Would you eat the cost or would you raise your prices? You'd do the latter. I would, that's for sure. It's laws like these, poorly thought out laws that have been compounding for years. All these new laws, by the way, passed every day, are on the books for good, forever. We have no process for a law to automatically expire or fall off. They just continue to stack on top of each other. I've always thought like there should be some process where a law only stays on the books for a certain length of time, who knows, maybe 10 years or 20 years, and then it automatically comes back up for a revote. Otherwise, what happens in like a few hundred years, we just end up with tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of laws stacking up. I mean, eventually the state's going to be able to find a crime wherever they want. Anyways, so that's the first law. That's now implemented. That's active. But there's more, many others. We're already about out of time in this video, but I'll do a follow-up if you want me to with another insane law from California that's working its way through the legislature right now that will affect the housing market specifically. Crazy situation. Let me know if you want to hear about that. All right, that wraps up this episode. Like, subscribe. We'll see you next time.